I had been involved with many different gurus and yogis, and I had taken initiation from different spiritual masters. But the interesting thing is that I had met one spiritual master who taught me for about almost 3.5 years. But he always told me that he was not my guru. So one day, I took initiation from Sri Chinmoy. And then I came back and saw this previous teacher. And I mentioned how I found my guru now. He's given me initiation, and he explains and says that he is a Jagat Guru. So this first teacher kind of laughed. And he said, he's only a Mayavadi. And then he began to explain what Mayavadism is and personalism. And he went on to say, do you really want to know who the Jagat Guru is? Now, by now he had let me know that that meant very highly evolved spiritual teacher, a teacher of teachers. And so he paused, and then he asked me again. He said, do you really want to know? And by the time I was getting a little nervous, but I was more curious. And so then he asked the third time. He says, do you really want to know? And I says, yes. And he said, Srila Prabhupada, the spiritual master of the Hare Krishna movement. Now, during these 3.5 years where he was previously teaching me, every now and then he was teaching me what's called Raja Yoga and Astanga Yoga, a lot of kind of metaphysical things. But he would always say, I'm not your guru. But every now and then he would say something or explain something, but he would say, but Prabhupada says like this, or Prabhupada has done like this. And I thought Prabhupada was maybe his uncle or some friend of his. And so when he mentioned that name again, it rang a bell. And he says, when he told me that Srila Prabhupada, the spiritual master of the Hare Krishna movement, I was devastated. Because I had saw the devotees 2 different times. And I thought they were very weird, unusual. And I was thinking, you mean those people who wear the bed sheets? Who put war paint on their face? And go around jumping down in the streets with tennis shoes on and mismatched socks? You mean they are connected with something that is very advanced, very high? He said their spiritual master is a spiritual master of spiritual masters. And they have the higher knowledge on the planet. And now it was really bewildering, because here I've been with this person for 3.5 years. He was a tremendous mystic. He read minds, and he had all kind of powers and shaktis. And he had never cheated me or disappointed me, and he always told me that he wasn't my guru. So I had, I was in a dilemma. So I decided I would go and explore with the idea that I was really trying to prove to myself that for some reason he's lied to me. So I got as many books as I could from the devotees. And I went to visit the temple in New York, and I would go and hear Bhagavad-gita class. I would go and hear the devotees talk, just to find fault. But the more that I studied the books, the more I became convinced. And as I talked to devotees, I saw there's all different types of devotees. And some are serious, some are less serious. And I saw that there were some problems, but I realized those who are following are very special, and the philosophy was very special. So then after that, I came back to him at some point, because after studying like that for 6 months, then I decided to join. And I joined. I went to Dallas to help Satsu Maharaj in the Gurukula. But now once, a couple of years later, I saw that same teacher. And I wanted to ask him some questions, and ask him a few questions. And he became furious, very furious. He said, you have met the spiritual master of the universe. And now you're coming back to me, asking me questions. He said, you're not going to get me to make offenses to such great soul. He said, when Srila Prabhupada came to America, there were many, these are his words, spiritual teachers who knew of his calling. and who should have assisted him. He said, I stopped teaching when Prabhupada came to America. Then he began to explain, I taught you all of these things because I saw you were so entangled, so interested in such things, and I realized that this would help you in your service for Prabhupada in the future. He said, now, you leave here and don't you ever come back again. Now, the first physical encounter was also in New York, and that must have been, I guess, 1971. There was a devotee in New York named Bhakti Jana, sort of unusual devotee, and he was trying to start a program in Harlem. So Prabhupada had given him permission to do this program. So he was trying to gather, some black bodies to help him. And I was just, a bhakta coming, to visit at that point. I was still at the University of Princeton, and on weekends I would come to the temple. So I had connected with him because Prabhupada was coming in. I think there was a Rath Yatra or something, but Prabhupada was going to meet with those devotees who were going to work in the Harlem project. So we all came in for darshan, and somehow I was lucky to sit very close to Srila Prabhupada. And as everyone felt, I felt he was looking at me, very piercing and very intimately. And I remember asking one question that was bothering me. See, when I would come to the temple in New York, I had graduated from Princeton by that time, and I was in suits, and I was working as an assistant to the public defender in New Jersey. And I was a little puffed up, I graduated from this good school and had a nice job, and I was quite young. But not many devotees would preach to me. And there was probably many reasons. One, they probably saw I was puffed up. Two, they probably wasn't sure. This guy in his black body, can he really know this, understand this? And because I had been in so many different environments, I was brought up in the inner city area, but I went to very, sophisticated prep schools. And I was, in environments where I was with, senators' sons and things. Then I went to Princeton around all these environments. So I was very sensitive to the situations. So I had this question for Srila Prabhupada. And my first question was, Srila Prabhupada, there's prejudiceness in this movement. Prabhupada looked at me, he says, He said, so someone is thinking you're the body? And if you're disturbed that they're thinking that you're the body and you become disturbed, he says, then you are also nonsense. That was the spirit. So the spirit was, Prabhupada was telling me in so many words, yes, so bodily consciousness is there in so many ways. But if I'm getting so distracted because of that, then that is my nonsense. We were walking with Srila Prabhupada, and I was asking a few questions. I don't really recall the questions. But then Prabhupada at one point, he stopped and he looked directly at me, and he quoted Bhagavad-gita 264. And that verse has so much in purport, so much to do with renunciation of the senses, controlling the mind, and depending, on Krishna's mercy. So I took that very much to heart, and I, started living a very sort of austere life, where I would chant, 48 rounds every day. 42 rounds. I said 48 before. 42 rounds, and I would sleep, for a long, long time. I would sleep in about 3 hours. I would get up 12:30, 1 o'clock, chant most of my rounds before Arti, do some reading, and I was eating once a day in that way. But that instruction, it was like so piercing, and it was Mahabodhi who reminded me of that, because he was saying how we were all together, and Prabhupada just almost knocked me over, with that instruction. And because even afterwards, the devotees were saying, Prabhupada gave you such a personal instruction, it's amazing. Because the next day, Mahabodhi got such an instruction, different kind of instruction, but he got a personal instruction. And so it was very clear on his mind. So we were talking about that the other day, and he was helping me to focus. And then I started thinking how that had much of influence in encouraging me in my life of sort of simplicity, and renunciation. Mm-hmm. Then later, we started meeting with Srila Prabhupada more often. I joined the library party. I joined Setsu Maharaj, Hirananda Maharaj, Then we started traveling around, distributing books, contract sets in America and Europe. We had one wonderful encounter with Srila Prabhupada after we had started the work. So we met him in San Francisco. I think it was at, let's see, I think it was at Jayananda's house, at his apartment. And so Prabhupada wanted all of the devotees to come in. He had heard about our work. And he talked to us so sweetly. Then he gave each of us some prasadam. It came up one by one. And he gave us a flower. And what was really significant that always stayed with me is that we were asking him some questions about how to do the work. And two things. First thing he told us, he says, you try your best and Krishna will help you. And we took that very seriously. We were realizing that if Prabhupada wants this to go on, because Srila Prabhupada was very pleased that books, before they were even written, that there was such an audience waiting for them. See, the idea of the contract sale was that we would find professors, universities, museums, and also libraries who would agree to take any book that Prabhupada, that we had now available, and any book that comes out later in print. So what's more wonderful for an author than knowing not only are people taking my book, but they're waiting, so let me finish writing so they can be able to receive those books. So we came, the library, devotees working with the library party, we came in to see Srila Prabhupada, and he gave us this very simple technique. And the technique was that we should get the order from a very prestigious professor, university, or institution. And after getting it, we should keep it, or keep a copy of it. And then when we visit other universities, or other persons connected in academia, we should show them the order that we receive. And it was a simple thing. When you think about it, he was really telling us, everybody has their gurus, everybody has their acharyas. And everyone wants to be about something that's successful or important. And what important people do, others will also do. So we started doing that as we traveled through America, through Europe, and some of the other places, India. We started using that as a technique. We would go to those places. You know, we take the most difficult place or the most prestigious place. And whatever we get from there, then we would go to other institutions, other professors, and show them, oh, such and such. And I did this, for instance, one of the biggest sales we ever had in the history of the library party was at Brigham Young University. And I met the spiritual head of the Mormon church at that time. And, you know, they had, I think, an academic head and a spiritual head. And I'm not sure which one. It's so long ago that I met. But I met one of the heads. And he was so enthused about Srila Prabhupada's books. He knew many, many languages, about 20 languages. He was a linguist, historian, philosopher, etc. And he had been studying various things from Vedic cosmology. So when he saw Prabhupada's books, the way it was formatted and the detail, he was in ecstasy. He bought a complete set of Bhagavad-gita, Sri Tirtha for himself, ordered for his department library, wrote a note and told the librarian for the general library, buy these books, everything this book salesman has. Now when I took his order, took his letter to the librarian, then when I started visiting other departments, see, at most schools we would sell books maybe to the history department, philosophy, you know, comparative literature, you know, religion, and sometimes we could stretch it to other places. But here, I had the letter from the Acharya of the Institute. So every place, every department I would go to, I would talk with them, and I would tell them that I had just went to visit such and such, and he was such a nice person, and he, I probably just pulled it out kind of casually, he bought this, and they would practically snatch the sheet from me and see, oh, Hugh Nibley, that was his name, he's gotten this, oh, let me, also I want the same thing. And then in a few cases, he had given me some professors to see. And I would go see the professor and I would tell them that I was sent by Hugh Nibley, and they would be so happy. Oh, he knows me, he sent you, and it was just so easy. It was all based on the technique that Srila Prabhupada had given us. By the time I left that university, I think I had distributed about 16 or 17 standing orders All the major departments had 4 Bhagavatam sets, Chaitanya Charitamritas. So almost 20 book sets just in that one school, just from that little technique. We found sometimes the professors who were not, so senior, some of them sometimes had trouble with Srila Prabhupada. We found, in most cases, the top guys, even if they were totally against what Prabhupada had written. I'll give you an example. I had one professor to say, look, I don't like his interpretations, but I am completely amazed at his gall in taking up the Srimad Bhagavatam. See, because even amongst the scholars, the Bhagavad Purana is most complex, and it drives them batty, because they think it's the Krishna of the Gita, the Krishna of the Bhagavatam, the Krishna of Mathura. They think it's sometimes a different Krishna. They just can't see how the same personality can be involved in so much. And for Prabhupada to take on the Bhagavatam and to explain things in such a way. So I've had professors to say that they wanted the books, they would buy all the books, and they'd be in total disagreement. But they were so amazed at Prabhupada's presentation and his gall. And then we would have many of those who just knew that Prabhupada was giving the best presentation on Bhakti, and they wanted it. And some of these professors, were just amazing that these professors are studying intimate things about Rupa Goswami and Jiva Goswami and whatnot. So some of them were sort of like fallen Brahmins from a previous life. They would be so fascinated with this subject matter. And they would relish the book like anything, even though they couldn't follow any of the principles. I had one experience of meeting one professor. We would wear suits, and we had cards, Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. So I came in to see the professor. I gave him my card. He looked at it, and he turned red, and his eyes were big, and he was practically foaming at the mouth. It took him almost like a minute before he finally was able to speak. I don't know whether to run out the room or whether the guy was having an epileptic fit or what. Go call find the doctor. Then finally he strained and he says, "You, get out of here. Get out of here." And just as I was getting out the door, I was ready to, I was going out. I don't know why he wanted me out, but I didn't want to be in his presence with that kind of energy. And then as I was walking out the door, he said, "I've read these books. If people accept this philosophy," he said, "I would have no job." So some of them were reading. He was a professor of Sanskrit. And he had read how Prabhupada had said that a teacher should teach by example. Teachers should have certain qualities. And he knew he's teaching the chain smoker, an alcoholic, a meat eater, flesh eater, that if this Vedic civilization was established and people accepted this as the rule of law for teaching, he would have no job. We saw both sides. We saw how many people were so appreciative, and they felt that Prabhupada's books added to their scholarship and gave them so much information, about Bhakti. Even some professors would say this. I had one professor take the Nectar Devotion. He says, "This is the best book out on Bhakti. This is the best handbook." And he ordered it for his class and everything. And then we see other cases where the professor knew what was in the books and was very threatened because he saw that the books called people out based on what they really were. And he was not a teacher, by example. One concurrence I had with Srila Prabhupada was in Toronto. I was guarding his room. And at that time, Prabhupada's door was glass, to his sitting room. So you could look in while you were guarding him and you could watch him, part of the day as he was doing things. And what was most impressive to me is how Prabhupada had this regulated schedule. He was chanting his rounds and meeting so many people. But what was most impressive to me at that time, and I was pretty much of a new devotee, was to see him reading his own books. And I thought, oh, Prabhupada is reading his own books. How important it is for us to read the books. If here even the Guru is relishing his own books, then how much we should be relishing and appreciating, honestly, even more. So those were qualities I was very, very impressed by. So when Prabhupada was leaving his body, and he wanted to go, to Gitanagari and help us in knowing how to do Varnashram Dharma. He stopped in England. By that time, I was in Eastern Europe, and we had heard that Prabhupada was coming. So we dropped everything, and we came to to the manor. So when Srila Prabhupada heard that I was around, he immediately told devotees to call for me. And by that time, Prabhupada, had practically stopped all bodily functions, and devotees were carrying him, in the palanquin to have darshan. So when I came in, and it was, there was one devotee, there was Krishna Kshetra, and a devotee, he left his body, I think his name was Dwarkadish. He used to work in Hungary and Poland and those places. So we were all together, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj was there. So Tamal had already written me many wonderful letters telling me how that I should continue sending these letters to Prabhupada as he's sick, is giving him new life. That he was probably so happy to hear about the preaching, how his books were going into so many different places. And so I was sending reports about every 2 weeks. And I would be sending detailed reports. Who got the books, what was said, what was done. And Tamal would tell us how Prabhupada would hear this after taking lunch. And that after being garlanded and put chandan on him, and he would sit back, and Tamal would tell me he would close his eyes and he would swoon, etc. So Tamal was eager for me to come in, for Prabhupada to see me. So an interesting thing happened. I came in, I sat before Prabhupada's desk. And Prabhupada his voice was so weak. So he would call me, he would motion over to come closer. So then I came a little closer. And then he motioned for me to come around the desk. And then when I came around, Prabhupada started rubbing my head. And then he started crying, and then he embraced me. And then he said something which I didn't quite understand. But then what he said later, he says, "Your life is successful." And then I said, "Prabhupada, we're only doing things because you are forcing us. Otherwise, how could we do anything?" And then his voice became very strong, even though he was so weak. His body was so weak. He says, "Yes, and that is the parampara. My guru has forced me, and I am forcing you. And that is how things are going on." And it was so amazing. It was the most amazing experience I ever had with Srila Prabhupada. I mean, I couldn't appreciate it. And the next thing that happened shows you how I didn't appreciate it. Because it just came upon me, it was so fast. And Prabhupada was so weak, and at the same time, he was so strong and giving so much love. So the next day, now this was the very last time I saw Prabhupada. The next day, Tamal wanted me to experience what Prabhupada's mood was when he would read these reports. So he wanted me to physically come in and to read a report to Srila Prabhupada. Because he would write me these letters saying how Prabhupada says, your work, he would give comments after, Tamal would read to him, and then Prabhupada would give some comments, and then Tamal would send me the comments. And they're some of the most amazing letters I've seen. And not because they're my letters, but they're some of the most amazing letters. So Tamal wanted me to experience what he was experiencing from Prabhupada. It's like Sajananda once told me, Sadananda. He had told me how once he was in the room when Prabhupada got a letter when I was in the communist countries. And Prabhupada didn't start speaking afterwards. He said, Prabhupada said, so he did not know the language. They did not know his language. He did not know their language. But the books are going out. He is a black man in different race. And the books are going. He says, and the books are going. And he says, and Prabhupada went into like a trance. He says, the books are going. And he says, Prabhupada just went out like that. And so these are the kind of things that were going on. So Tamal wanted me to experience something of what they were experiencing when Prabhupada would read the letters. So now, the day before, Prabhupada has embraced me and told me my life was successful. And 4 to 5 of the devotees were in the room. So now I'm going around kind of puffed up, Prabhupada has embraced me, And everybody was saying, people knew me then as Ganesham. So everyone was saying, those who knew that, oh, Ganesham was embraced by Prabhupada, this and that. So I was feeling cocky, Prabhupada embraced me. So the next day I came in, reading my report, and the report I think was from our activities in Eastern Europe. And I started reading about the events of how the books had gotten out, this professor had taken, this library had accepted, this museum had accepted. And Prabhupada at one point stopped me. And he said, "It is by Krishna's mercy," very piercing. He was chastising me that I was accepting, one, that I deserved his darshan, that I was feeling proud of what I had received. He told me some other things in that same session about the communists, if they don't take the Krishna consciousness, they will have no grain, there will be many problems. But this one, he tuned into me and said like this. It was the very last words that Prabhupada had ever said to me, the very last time I saw him. And it just lived with me to realize that we must always remind ourselves that anything that we're able to do, it is by the mercy of Guru and the mercy of Krishna. So here, the best time I had with Prabhupada, most amazing experience was the day before, and the most devastating experience was the last one of this serious chastisement.